bit about him. He's passionate about the influence of plant-based nutrition, and is actually a member of the U.S. Professional Tennis Association. If you look at it, you see a tall drink of water here. He learned the power of food firsthand working with his grandfather, Dr. William Esser, who ran a health sanitarium in South Florida for 65 years. Inspired by the radical health cures he witnessed, he went to medical school here at Tampa, USF, then did a residency at Harvard, and completed a sports fellowship at the Mayo Clinic. He now practices... Yes, I think most people can hear me. I'm pretty loud anyway. Thanks. He now practices non-operative sports medicine and lifestyle medicine in Jacksonville, Florida, where he, his wife, and a team of health professionals run day-long health intensives and week-long retreats. Prior to his career in medicine, he was ranked #1 in the U.S. in men's open doubles tennis by the U.S. Tennis Association. He continues to be a proponent of exercise as medicine through his clinical work and online offerings. His website, if you want to learn more, is esserhealth.com. And further ado, here's Dr. Esser.
Well, it almost feels like going full circle, going all the way from med school here at Tampa to kind of going all the way up the coast, down back, and here again. So thanks for the chance to join you all. I'm excited to share some thoughts. We're going to start a bit with myths busted. It's something that many of you probably already know and are familiar with. Hopefully there'll be some review, etc., and hopefully some new things. Both a 30,000-foot view as well as getting into some specific details. I hope at the end of it, it'll re-empower you, re-motivate you, encourage you to not only good behaviors you're already doing, but perhaps seeking out new ways of empowering yourself and motivating yourself, your friends and family, to their best health and best vitality. Yes, I really cannot take responsibility for my path. I give much of the responsibility to my grandfather, who did run, in fact, a 10-acre facility, 65 30-some patients at a time, 65 years, 30,000 patients cataloged. I grew up there, watching everybody get well, radically altering their health through therapeutic water fasting, nutritional modifications, vegan-type nutrition. And then I went to medical school. And everybody stayed sick. All we did was add more medication to their list, to their pharmacy list, etc. And I thought, did I grow up in voodoo? Or is there something that we're missing? Is there something that is not fully getting out there? And I want to share some of that with you today because at this point in my career, in my history, I can say to you incontrovertibly that the evidence, the science-based evidence for plant-based nutrition is unarguable, is universally almost accepted in many ways. And yet there's so many myths. And we're going to look at many of them, again, both a 30,000-foot view, as well as getting into some details. And I will tell you, this is not the end for you, I hope. This is hopefully the beginning of conversation with yourselves, or maybe just a stepping stone along the way, that you continue to be lifelong learners. So yes, that's me on my grandfather's shoulders. Certainly, I think for the rest of my life, I will be in many ways. So my goals, I want to explore some common myths, engage the science with you, and of course, empower and revitalize your belief, hopefully, in health, and your own ability to be vital and thriving. Let's start very simply, because how many of you know John McDougall, right? He's quite an interesting bird. I've known him for many years, kind of thing. And over the years, as you've seen him progress, because you share all the science, all the literature, all the evidence, and yet how many lives have been changed, many, and yet how many people have had to put up these roadblocks, bigger roadblocks than just, I don't have the science. It's bigger things, deeper things, things that you and I even sometimes hold on to in our hearts when we say, hey, what I do doesn't matter to my health. Now, I know you wouldn't say that out loud or verbalize it, but somewhere deep in our subconscious, often this is what people are thinking, right? Every person that drives up to McDonald's is essentially saying this, right? Every single one of them. Every single time that you sit down and eat non-health promoting foods. Notice I didn't say good or bad food, because we should strip all morality from food, really. Yes, we talk about how it's processed and how prepared, etc. There's morality perhaps there. But as far as the nutritional quality of food, there's no morality to it. It is about whether it's health promoting for you, when we look at it as a health, or non-health promoting. Do you know what it does? That by having that conversation, you immediately strip away that, do I really want that, but I can't have it, I shouldn't have it, etc. Instead, it's like, well, wait, I just said health matters to me. So as a result, where does health come from? Health comes from health-producing behaviors, from healthy living. What does healthy living look like? We're going to talk about that. But make sure, where are you when you think of this. Let's look briefly at the science. The World Health Organization years ago clearly said that by 2020, 2/3 of the global burden of disease will be associated with diet. Moving from plants and exercise to non-health promoting foods. Large of those foods, refined foods, meat, dairy, etc. On and on. You can read, and hopefully you've read that already. 2/3 of the global burden of disease. No longer big cats sinking their teeth into people's necks, nor viral particles killing people off as the primary source of problems in the world. But diet, nutrition, exercise. When we look at more recent nice studies, for example, we can see here's one called the EPIC study. You should be familiar with it, because it's one of the largest studies done today that looked at the rates, as you can see, of the most common cardiometabolic disease in the world. And they said, when we look at all these people over this 8-year period, if they had these behaviors, didn't smoke, had a BMI less than 30, meaning they're not obese, 3.5 hours a week of physical activity and healthy dietary principles, if they did that alone, their risk of disease did this. 78% low risk of developing chronic disease, 93% low risk of diabetes, 81% lower of a heart attack, 50% lower of a stroke, 30% lower risk of cancer. Just by doing these 4 simple things. Memorize them. They are powerful medicine in your life. They are based in science. And they are universally beneficial to individuals who want to have a healthy life. Without a doubt, what you do, your fingers, your feet, and your forks are some of the master levers of your health destiny. Basic, 30,000-foot view. The next one that we often hear, though, woe is me. How many patients do I see in clinic who walk in and go, doc, look, I hardly eat anything. They may be right. Maybe they're eating all the wrong things, right? But at the heart of that is this idea that genetics, not choices, define my health. I myself have been guilty, maybe none of the rest of you have, so I'll do a confessional here, of times in my life where I felt like, I'm doing everything I can and I'm still not healthy. But yet when I pause and take that moment at the end of the day and really look at what it is I am doing, what am I filling my body, my mind, and my heart with, I'm not in fact doing everything I can to be as healthy as I could be. So very important that we back up from a moment. I would tell you 3 stories. We'll start with an animal model about how powerful choices, not just genetics, are. Well, this is what many people think is going on, right? Right here. It's just genetics, right? That's all it is. It's the evolutionary history of man, if you will. But really, this is a great one. So some university researchers at Duke had a type of mouse that's genetically modified. It has a defect in the leptin pathway, which is all about satiety or feelings of fullness. Well, every mouse that has this genetic modification turns out to be obese, diabetic, cancer-ridden, and gold in color. So they can always tell which ones they are. And they said, well, what would happen if we took a pregnant mouse and fed it high doses of methyl donor groups, things like B12, methionine, choline, etc.? Do you know what happened? All of the baby mice were brown, were slender, and in fact, the researchers found they had none of the susceptibility to cancer and diabetes that the parent mouse did. Yet when they looked at the genetics of the individual mice, they were identical across the board. Except that little methyl donor groups, what we call CH3 molecules, that any of you have taken your basic chemistries, had been tied onto different parts of the genetic code in such a way to turn certain genes on and others off. A remarkable thing that we call epigenetics. You should read about it. Google search it tonight. But epigenetics is the ability of us to alter our genetic inheritance in its expression. It is amazing. So in other words, every thought that you are thinking right now, every food that you ate today, every physical activity you do tonight will influence the expression of your genes in the days, hours, weeks, months, and years ahead. Truly, as they say, we can nurture nature. I love it. Epigenetics. Look at it. Another one, the Pima Indians, the classic thrifty gene hypothesis group. Those people who say, I hardly eat anything, but it just sticks to me. Well, they probably have very thrifty genes. They're very able to hold on to calories, right? The joke of you walk by a Danish shop and you put on 5 pounds kind of thing. Right? But the reality becomes that in fact we have inherited some of those genes, right? Because during periods of famine in the past, if you were scrawny and, as she said, a tall drink of water like me, perhaps I would have died off. thus not giving my genetics on to the next generation. However, if you were good at maintaining calories, you survived through periods of famine and thus passed on your genetic inheritance to the next generation. But of course, the problem is in our society, there are no periods of famine, are there? There is food on every corner, and thus 2 out of 3 Americans are overweight or obese in America today, which we'll look at. The Pima Indians are this classic description. Here in Arizona, they live on a reservation. Here they live in the wilderness up in the mountains of Mexico. The rates of type 2 diabetes are what you can see there. On the reservation, where they consume largely processed, non-health promoting foods, alcoholic beverages, and meat-derived foods, the rates of diabetes is 1 out of 2 individuals. Yet when they free live up in the mountains, consuming largely a diet based upon plants, in large portion of their calories, as well as exercise up and down the mountains, their rates of diabetes are 8%. Yet when they've done genetic testing on these individuals, they are identical genetics. Yet, it is their lifestyle that modifies the expression of those genes. Powerful. The last one is quite a sad story. It's about the smallest island nation in the world. It's called Nauru. Look it up tonight, Nauru. It's less than a couple miles in size. It's in the South Pacific. Well, something happened there years ago, but let's first look at what happened long before. They were a warrior people, but relatively peaceful because they had no enemies. So they were tribal in nature. They consumed some fish from the sea. They grew some plantains on this small area. They subsisted. They survived, if you will. They were slender type folks. Well, what happened is sometime in the 1960s, they found out. No, it's not rabbit droppings. It is, in fact, phosphates. As many of you may know, phosphates are just about everything, all kinds of plastics and all kinds of soaps, etc. And what they found is that, wow, they could dredge it up. They began to dredge it up. And in fact, at one point in the last 30, 40 years back, they had the highest per capita income in the entire world. Well, you know, when money comes in, they said, well, enough of eating that ridiculousness. I'm going to apply in every single possible thing on earth because I can have it all. And they did. And they got all this. And guess what happened? In Nauru today, if you look at the statistics that exist right now, 95% of their population are overweight or obese, and over 50% have diabetes. Wait. 90 to 95% of all people are overweight or obese in Nauru now. That was unheard of 15 to 20 years prior. You want an experiment on people? There's your experiment on how radically lifestyle alters health. And of course, the Nauru government, bless them, is saying, go out and start walking a little bit more to help lose weight. Oh, really? That's the answer? How about getting back to how they previously lived? A way that for many of us generations back was plant-based in large part and physically active. We are a modern-day Nauru. Welcome. 2 out of 3 of us are overweight or obese. 1 out of 3 of us has high blood pressure. 1 out of 6 of us has high cholesterol. 1 out of 9 of us has type 2 diabetes. This was not like this 50 years ago. In fact, I think it's very sad. If you go back and look at these stats here, you can see that at first they only had 2 or 3 types of, or specters, if you will, of weight in America. But over the years, we had to keep adding on more and more over time. They didn't even exist. So we have radically changed who we as Americans are, and really in the Western civilization. And the question becomes, the foundational question for all of us at every level of society is this genetics or is this lifestyle? Because you see, if it's genetics, the real answer here is me going back to Harvard and coming up with genetic fixes. Right? More surgeries, more medicines, etc. And until we begin to alter how we as a society perceive disease, that's all we do. Right? What do the press love? They love all this high-end, high-tech, cool genetic modification stuff. That's not the problem. That's not why we are where we are. And so what did happen? We want to be able to look at actually some numbers and figures because in America right now, we've radically changed how much sugar we eat. This is even just what the government recommends. And look how much sugar, children, adults, lower income, higher income, everybody is above it with the addition of sugar to our diet. When it comes to salt, we can say, okay, 77% of salt comes from processed and restaurant foods. And we know that in America, Right now we recommend less than 2 grams of salt per person per day. In some populations, less than 1,800 milligrams. And yet, on average, 95% of males and 75% of females consume more than 6 grams of salt per day. Do you know that an additional 1 gram of salt per day will drive your blood pressure up by up to 5 to 10 points systolic? That's the same amount as what a single blood pressure medicine will reduce it by. Is there any wonder? We're eating 3 times the amount of salt that we should be eating, on large part in America, and that can also happen to you even with plant-based foods, so be careful, right? And thus it drives our pressures up. Same thing when it comes to meat consumption. Look at these stats. This is from the National Chicken Council, 1965 to 2016. Good news, we've reduced our consumption of red meat. Tragic news, we've almost tripled our consumption of chicken. As a result, we've radically increased the amount of total meat consumed. As a result, an average of about 57 pounds per person per year has been added on in America. Wow, that's radical changes. When we look at milk, we've increased the consumption by 300% of dairy in America. Yes, truly the power of cheese, isn't it? Yeah? When we looked at this is from the USDA. All the numbers and stats I'm giving you are just CDC and USDA, right? They have the numbers. We all know this is true science. That's why it's so important, because unlike when I went to med school and thought, my grandfather must just be kind of crazy. There must not be good science for this. In fact, there's overwhelming science for this. And so when we look at the USDA's website, we see here with the My Plate recommendations, more than 50% of calories from added fat, oil, and processed flour, and less than 8% of total calories are from fruits and vegetables in the average American's diet. Is there any wonder why we are such a sick nation, the sickest nation on earth? So when you look at it, this is what's happened. We eat more than ever before. We get less than ideal physical activity. Those of you who are savvy, of course, know that about 3,500 calories equals 1 pound of fat. So do the math, right? If a person eats that every day, 500 extra calories, little by little, that fat creeps on. But fat, of course, by itself, it's not about the visual, all this fatism and all this nonsense. It's about fat releases hormones that result in the increased rates of cardiometabolic disease directly. So if you have visceral fat here, whether you're a vegan or otherwise, you increase your risk of stroke by up to 300%. And you increase your risk of type 2 diabetes by up to 900% if you are obese on the BMI chart. This is no magic. This is just true science. So really when we look at this, choices, not chances. Read the rest. This is why nothing and no one is safe. Nothing and no one is sacred, if you will. When it comes to this, I don't know if you saw this, Michelangelo gave a 12-month, 20-city tour of the U.S. You know, he came over like that, and we sent him back like this. But this is the reality. There was a recent study, quite interesting, that was done, and it went and interviewed people in their 20s and 30s. It looked at their weight. It looked at their rates of cardiometabolic disease. And it was extremely low. And they all said, it'll never happen to me. Please, never. Look at me, I'm so healthy. I do CrossFit. And then, what happened? They followed them out 20 years, right? Over the last 20 years. And guess what? The rates of these diseases are about 80% of them. Those are the same numbers that everybody else gets, right? So chronic exposure to non-food results in disease. End of story. You may have excellent genetics and your body can tolerate more abuse than the next person. However, the disease comes for you at some point regardless. So when we look at this then, let's go to our next myth. There is debate in the science as to what constitutes a healthy diet. Very interesting. I would say to this, yes and no. You are correct. There are conflicts when we come to the extremes. There will be people that will argue their death about whether a ketosis diet or a paleo diet, or I'll make Atkins over here and veganism over here, are really most ideal for all people. However, there is no conflict whatsoever when it comes to the recommendations to consume more plants in our diet. Across the board, every national and international organization across the board recommends that. So when you think about that, that is beneficial in your mind, because if you're going home to have a conversation with people or friends or family in your life that may be very conflicted and at odds with you, you don't throw down the gauntlet and say, change fully, or you're out of my house. Instead, you say, let's eat more plants. and it's a gentle way to engage them, to hook them, to bring them in, that is based in good science, as well as eating less meat, fewer highly processed foods. Again, highly processed foods can be a risk for those who choose a, quote, vegan diet as well, right? So be careful with that. It's not about junk foodism that we're looking for. So the devil, as they say, is truly in the details, isn't it? But let's look at some stats, or figures, or science. Sorry, you're stuck with me today with some science. Coming from Harvard and Mayo, I like that. And when we look, we know, let's start here simple. So on average, this is comparing Californian population versus the Seventh-day Adventist population in California. Thus, they have the same environmental exposures as far as sunlight, air, toxins, etc. And if you look, on average, the Seventh-day Adventist population, which many of you know, on average tends to be vegetarian, many of them, or at least eat less meat, less dairy, avoid smoking, have good social networks. On average, they live about 10 years longer. So, eating more plants, vegetables, etc., prolongs life in individuals who live in the same communities, yet choose to fill themselves with that. In addition, when we look, this is the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, lower rates of coronary heart disease, hypertension, diabetes, obesity, and cancer rates. And as I mentioned, they live longer. So in vegetarians who consume predominantly vegetarian diet, all of these common diseases, which we just saw are extremely common in America, are much lower. Science proves it. In fact, the mortality, the likelihood of dying of a vegetarian is about half that of the general population. Now, I would argue, if you look at the details in this article, it's pretty pathetic how little salad they eat. 38% of them ate a raw salad daily. I don't really consider that plant-based in the least bit. That's fewer than 50% of people eating some salad. So imagine if all you do is eat a lot of salad, fruits, and vegetables, and unprocessed food. I would argue that your mortality rate would drop even lower. But certainly based on the science, half that of the general population, age matched, etc. So when we look at this, we know it reduces disease risk, and it prolongs life. Yes, we're at that 30,000-foot view. We're just plodding along, stepping through these, because these are intrinsic to setting up the foundation for the structure. All right? And you want to be able to set up the structure of your life based upon principles that make sense. The next one is this. The human body is intended for meat consumption. It's kind of a strange thought process that we have, because, when we look at this character, we do not say, hey, let me serve you some of this. No, we do not. It's just not even, it doesn't come to our heads. And we don't say, we say, hey, you should eat some of this. I bet you'd like it. And I bet you'd like some of this, and I bet you'd like some of those, right? I mean, it's just, even as little children in the first grade or kindergarten, we look, what does this animal eat? He eats this. What does this animal eat, right? So what happens when it comes to us as animals, right? I mean, when we look at this critter, right, we don't go, hey, let me feed you some of those. No, we don't. We don't do that. And, in fact, we tend, on average, to say, hey, no, not that either. Sometimes, yes, maybe a little here and there, but I would argue that they're made physiologically for more of that, arguably, when we look at their physiology. But when we look at this, we also don't go, hey, let's put some of that in there, ooh. Or, hey, let's stuff some of that in my gas tank. No, there is a clear relationship. We say this gets this and this goes in there. Do you realize that? Like, everything is so straightforward in life until we get to ourselves. I mean, when we look at these cute little critters, we go, oh yeah, you should have some of this. No. You say, hey, you should have some of that. That's what you would enjoy, and that's what you're made for. Right? So this beautiful critter here, we say, hey, have a little cantaloupe. No. We don't. And in fact, we say, you probably would want that, you probably already caught that, go enjoy it, etc. But the reality becomes, it's very clear. But then we somehow look at these folks, and we get all kinds of confused. We begin to just go, well, maybe you should have some of that, maybe you should have some of this, maybe you should have some of that, maybe you should have some of that. Oh, why don't we try a little of this? Oh, maybe a little of that. No! Hey, easy, none of that, right? But the reality becomes, we get all kinds of confused. Is it just our lack of knowledge of this? I would argue yes. There's so much confusion. I mean, whether you believe in evolution or creation, truly there's a blueprint for the body, that the body in some ways is intended for certain things to be placed inside of it. Or are we just so unique that, no. Every other creature, every other creation is so obvious what it is. What about our own? Well, let's briefly look. So if you look at the anatomy, right, you've got these grinding, reciprocating teeth, unlike any carnivore on Earth, right? Cats and dogs can only go up and down, correct? Unlike we have herbivores, they can do this to grind grain, to grinding, to break them up. We have the absence of claws, yeah? Although some of you may say, well, I've got claws. Well, if you think you can, as old Dr. Clapper liked to love to say, jump on the back of a cow, stick those claws in and bite, you know what's going to happen? You'll get pumped right off. Right? So we do not. In fact, we have opposable thumbs that I would argue are excellent for plucking grapes off a stem, or turning an apple, or peeling a banana, right? That is why we have these opposable thumbs. That's why they're there. In addition, we have color vision. Unlike many of our animal friends that have black and white vision. Why do we have color? So that I don't climb 45 feet up in the mango tree, get to the green mango and go, oh, it's green! Oh no! Go back down, etc. No. So you can look at the tree and go, that one's ripe, that one's not. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to get the ripe fruit. You are able to identify when the food is ready and prepared and colorful, etc. Our colons are extremely convoluted, like this. Versus a smooth in the big cats. The big cats are red there. The convolution, this intricacy of our intestines, creates more surface area. The more surface area you have, the more nutrients you can absorb. The more nutrients you can absorb, the better overall your health. But if you have a smooth intestine, stuff just kind of flows in and flows out, right? So people get ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease where the whole lining breaks down and becomes very smooth. They don't absorb well. They begin to have problems. We have very long intestines, right? In fact, if you were to take all the surface area of our intestines out and open it up, it could cover up the surface of a tennis court. It's pretty crazy. All the tiny little villi and microvilli, they're called, all the projections, the amount of surface area we have. Versus a big cat, it's about 3 times the length of its torso, versus ours about 30 feet. So 12 times the length of our torso. Why? Because when stuff stays in you for a long time, your body can break it down longer and release more good things. In addition, why should it be short for this guy? Because the longer the meat stays in it, the more it breaks down and begins to create cancer-producing molecules. That is why, if you look at the scientific literature, so scholar.google.com, every one of you should go to that every once in a while. Scholar.google.com, if you don't already go there. And you plug in questions like plant-based nutrition, colon cancer, plant-based nutrition or veganism, and prostate cancer. And you'll see all these articles come up, and you go, whoa, look at that. Hey, let me send this to my aunt, Maggie, who totally, refuses to believe me, or whatever else. No, the science is there. And so you'll be able to realize that, in fact, meat consumption, dairy consumption, increases the risk of colon cancer significantly, in particular red meat. And we think because our intestines are so long, the meat stays in us for such a long period of time, that it releases more of the cancer-producing molecules that are just being rubbed along the inside of your gut for hours on end. Festering in there, and as a result, we increase the risk of neoplasms or cancer. Look at those beautiful little claws of that little critter, which we don't have. And we talked about this, right? The ability to twist fruit and to identify when fruit is ripe. Physiologically, at the very heart of it, we even lack an enzyme to break down uric acid, which is the end breakdown product of meat consumption, into something that is benign that we can readily pee out. And as a result, what do we get? The disease of King's, right? Gout, right? Or that's what ends up happening because we can't even break down uric acid. That uric acid particle builds up in our joints, and we end up with gout or injury to the joint cartilage, etc. In addition, we have very weak stomach acid as compared to that of a tiger, right? So, and then of course we lack the ability to produce our own vitamin C, thus making us dependent upon fruits and vegetables. Otherwise, we end up with a disease that is called scurvy. Beautiful, right? So, when we think about this, there's really very little in our anatomy or physiology to suggest somehow that we require dead animals. We don't. We have no anatomic or physiologic basis for why we require it for our bodies. And in fact, it's the exact same for dairy. Ready? Quiz. Raise your hand if you can think of an animal that voluntarily, without it being given to it, drinks the milk of another creature on earth. None! Zero, zilch, nada! Yet somehow we think we need the milk of a cow? Did I miss something? We need cow's milk as much as we need giraffe's milk or rat's milk or cow. We don't need it. We have no physiologic need, yet we've been lied to again and again in our society, so much so that you saw the rates of dairy consumption gone up by 300% in the last 30 years. What? Really? But it's so, that question right there, ask your friends who say that you need dairy. How many other creatures on earth drink milk and another creature voluntarily? You know what I mean? I have yet to get a good, person who loves their dairy. You really need a good response on that. They're just like, oh, okay, fine.
And how many, what species drinks milk after they're weaned, period?
Beautiful, right? But that's the really smart people. You take it a second. People that get you somewhere here, then you go there. But absolutely, and in fact, we know that the intention of that milk, right, is to take a 30-pound calf and turn it into a 300-pound cow in a year. That's right. All the insulin growth factor, all the growth stimulation, etc. And that's exactly what occurs to us, isn't it? Yeah? And so, but truly, for many people, they can say, I can give up the meat, I can do all that, but I can't get rid of the cheese, right? Because those casomorphones, right? Those addictive little particles that are there. And truly, but of course, they also, lots of salt, lots of sugar added to it, whether it's in ice cream, whether it's in cheese, etc. And the reality becomes, though, we are not intended for that, are we? And there's no evidence to suggest otherwise. So it's just, at this point in my life, I used to try to take people and strangle them and pull them over here with me and wrestle them, etc. Now I'm just like, look, let's just throw out a few simple rational comments here. And if they are how many of you know Prochaska's stages of change? So Prochaska is a well-known psychologist, somebody back knows him. And the idea here is to identify where either you or the individual you're talking with are in their movement to behavior change. So they can be in pre-contemplation, contemplation, preparation, action, or maintenance. So when I have the patient who comes in to see me these days, right, they come to see me, let's say, for some knee pain, and let's say they're also obese. I'm not going to just say, oh, this is a good steroid injection in your knee. I'm going to talk about their obesity and how it's influencing their knee pain and all the rest, right? But if I throw out there and I go, well, have you had any success with weight loss in the past? Just like fish, right? Little fish. And they go, I hardly eat anything. It never works for me anyway. I'm just like, oh, okay. Moving on. Right? They're essentially in a state of pre-contemplation, right? So the person that you say something to about reducing their meat or dairy intake, and they go, ah, they're in a state of pre-contemplation. They are not ready to have a conversation, and that's okay. Instead, you make them a nice special vegan dessert, you drop it off, you share it together, whatever it is, right? You share other things with them. The person who's in contemplation has been saying, you know what, I'm tired of these drugs I'm on. My mom has an history of heart disease, I don't want that, or I'm trying to lose weight, and then right, these other health things. They're in contemplation. And you begin to say, you know what's really powerful for that? It's plant-based nutrition. It really reverses your disease. Are you interested in hearing more? So think about that. Prochaska's stages of change. Anyway, go back and spend some time looking at those because they're very powerful to help guide you in your conversations as well as in yourself. Let's say you're thinking about exercise, for example, which is another pillar of good health with nutrition, but you've been like, I'm thinking about it. What can move you towards preparation and action and out of contemplation? Because again, when we say health comes from healthy living. Yeah? Next, if I become plant-based, I'm going to get vitamin deficiencies. Well, let's first on this turn to the American Dietetic Association, 2007. Appropriately planned vegetarian diets, including total vegetarian or eating diets, are helpful, nutritionally adequate, may provide health benefits and prevention, yada, yada, yada. Right? So you can read it. Beautiful. All you need is this. So when your friends or family members say, hey, I'm worried about you, this sounds pretty crazy, I think you should be doing this, just go, well, here, the good news is the American Dietetics Association actually says it is health promoting. So I think it seems like I'll be okay. Yeah. And then you can give them the article and they can look at themselves. But this is powerful because the science is there again. The science is behind us. The national groups, far and away, are in approval. But yet it doesn't trickle down to the clinics. It doesn't trickle down to the clinics because A, the physicians never learn it. In medical school, I received about 4 to 6 hours of education in, quote, nutrition. The majority of that was about vitamin deficiencies like beriberi and scurvy. Yeah, because everybody gets that, right? And so, right, or kwashiorkor or marasmus, like the malabsorption diseases of little kids in Africa. That's really important to know if I'm going to be a doctor without borders. But otherwise, why am I learning this? Because that's how it's killing America, right? And so the next thing is we don't get paid for it in clinical practice. Just so you know, doctors do not get paid for lifestyle and nutritional counseling. That's why it's not done. And third, it really does not stroke my ego to say, hey, little steamed greens and brown rice will do you right. It'll drop your blood pressure, right? No, I feel more like a doctor if I give you a pill. right? Because I have some magic, something from the sun god brought to me, right? That I can give to you, that will eradicate this disease. But that's the reality. So those are major reasons why we don't see it trickle down. But there are some issues to be concerned about, right? Like B12, we should all be aware of it. And you go, yeah, you're right. It is an issue. It's a water-soluble vitamin. It's stored in the liver and it's recirculated. It's very, very important for cellular health, for neurologic function, for psychiatric health. And you check the blood levels every once in a while. And in fact, after I'm a vegan for 10 years, I'll be really concerned. Done. All right, so moving on, right? So yes, you're correct. If you are a strict plant-based person, you should begin to replete. Now, it's crazy how lady the other day, she came to see me. She went on plant-based, full program, veganism, etc. She went back to her primary care doctor and he goes, this pain in your knees and your legs, I'm really worried about your B12. And I'm like, are you kidding me? This lady just started 2 weeks ago eating a bunch of plants, and all of a sudden, you're worried about her B12, not her obesity that I'm trying to address. Hello. Right, but so the reality becomes, yes, in 3 to 10 years you can exhaust your stories. How many of you know Alan Goldhammer? He's the head of True North Health, fun place out there. He's a little crazy, right? I love Alan, he's a good friend of mine. And he actually intentionally, for 25 years, took nothing but B12, took no animal products of any kind, etc. And then he would test himself every 2 years to see where his B12 was. It took about 18 to 20 years for him to become B12 deficient. No, now he's taking B12, not a big deal, right? So, but the reality becomes, yes, take some B12. Has health benefits, very low potential risk. Vitamin D also may be of concern for individuals. And so, yes, it's an important molecule. I tend to fall somewhere in the spectrum on vitamin D. There are those who think vitamin D is my master molecule, right? It fixes everything. And those who say it does nothing. The reality probably is somewhere in between. But I do think that checking your vitamin D and evaluating it, remember it's a neurohormone that's essentially activated through sun exposure and then the kidney. And so about 15 minutes of total body solar radiation is probably a good thing. A little nude sunbathing every once in a while. Or at least your arms and your legs for about 20 minutes if you don't have access to a solarium, right? Or if your neighbors complain. But when we look at it, no plant foods really have vitamin D of any kind except for some mushrooms. They're pretty pathetic amount of vitamin D they have in them. Right? So there are many sources and places to get that vitamin D, and I'll let other people argue about exactly where to derive it from and all the rest, because that is micro detail. I would say something to you here, because this is what tends to happen too often, right? I've been talking for the last, I know it seems like forever, but for the last sort of 10 years about this topic, and all too often we come to give lectures or presentations to various physicians. People hear the big story up here and then focus on the details and get all excited about arguing about the details. Where to get vitamin D from, what it should be derived from, that, what quantity, and all the rest. It's like, wait, have you even maximized here the overall nutrition, lifestyle interventions, if you will, exercise, sleep, emotional poise, etc., before we begin to argue about the micro details? The next one is, if I eat nothing but plants, I won't get enough protein. Yeah. So, I love this little meme, right? No one cares about your protein until all of a sudden you become a freaking vegan. Like, nobody is walking up to you at McDonald's and going, don't pull in there, please, it's so bad for you, right? But as soon as you say you're going to become a vegan, all of a sudden everybody's worried about your health. I mean, it's just ludicrous, isn't it? I mean, it's absolutely ludicrous, and it's gotten to such a height that probably half of you came here thought I was going to do a whole lecture on protein. I'm not. Because it's pretty irrelevant, as you'll see, if you appropriately plan your diet. It really doesn't matter that much. We've been lied to. In fact, how many of you, another test question, know someone in your life right now who suffers from a protein deficiency? All of no one. How many of you know someone who suffers from calorie excess? Oh, no, come on. Every one of you, get your hands up. You all know somebody. How do you know somebody with high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, heart disease, right on and on and on? You don't know anyone with protein deficiency, so why are we even talking about it? Right? It's a utter madness. It really is. If you just look at the logic of it, it's like, what? So, in other words, but there are people, remember I'm still a doctor, a little crazy, but I'm still a doctor. There are people severely ill or severely malnourished. So if you see these old kids with big pot bellies in Sahara, it's called marasmus or kwashiorkor, the protein deficiency. Marasmus is the complete malnutrition, including lack of protein. Those kids need protein. In fact, they also need calories, right?
Yeah.
And when we look at folks in ICU who have burns, who have severe liver disease, who are just spilling all their protein, or severe kidney disease, they need protein. Okay? So yes, there are those people. So if you find yourself in a conversation with one of these people who are sitting in the ICU with an 80% of their body surface area burned, do not recommend a vegan diet. All right, remember that, because that's like 90% of your time, isn't it? Like pretty much every conversation is with those people. No, but it's madness, because that's the only thing that really is there. When we think about protein consumption, we know that if you consume a well-planned, well-designed, plant-based program, vegan or vegetarian, you'll be protein sufficient. Now, the 13-year-old girl who chooses to eat iceberg lettuce and carrot sticks as the overwhelming majority of her meals is inadequate, correct?
Yeah.
That is not an adequately produced plant-based program, nor is it one that adequately reflects the science behind veganism, vegetarianism, or plant-based nutrition, all right? Any more than the person who eats junk food, vegan food all the time. The World Health Organization recommends that 5 to 15% of our total calories is derived from protein. And as I mentioned, perhaps some of these populations may benefit from more. As you may know, for example, some of these big NFL players are now going into veganism. They probably require more protein because how aggressively they're essentially beating up their bodies day in, day out. Right? That's a whole other story. But how many of us that are in the NFL are out there? Right? So when we think about this, we know there are significant health-promoting benefits to a rural Asian diet. If you haven't read the China study, you should. And we know that the total calories from protein are 8 to 14%, much like the McDougall diet, right? And others. Yeah, he doesn't pay me to market for him, by the way. Versus what we're seeing in America more and more, paleo-style diets, etc., are radically higher than that. And as you may know, significantly and statistically increase the risk of cardiometabolic disease. Go back to your scholar.google.com tonight and look up paleo diet and CrossFit athletes and cardiometabolic risk. And you'll see that some of the new studies that look at individuals who exercise like fiends, right, like guys in the CrossFit, and yet are eating a high-protein, animal protein diet, they begin to develop insulin resistance and hypertension and high cholesterol over about a 2 to 3 year period, regardless of how well they're exercising. Okay? So very important that we really come back to the science, come back to reality. If you're worried about your protein, even after everything I said, well then there are many fun little things like this on the internet that you can look at and realize where you can get what is recommended, about 46 to 56 grams, and look how you can easily get that into a health-promoting program. So at the heart of it, I know everybody wanted to have a huge debate about protein, but at the heart of it, there are no major concerns. Make it a well-balanced program, which we'll look at in a little bit. Because we know that animal-based protein increases the risk of heart disease, colon cancer, breast cancer, obesity, ulcerative colitis, and more. The ulcerative colitis piece I wasn't as familiar with, but I recently wrote an article for Health Science, the National Health Association's magazine. And when I did that, I went back and looked at the literature. And there are multiple good studies that now demonstrate that individuals who consume more meat and dairy products increase the rate of inflammatory bowel disease. And in fact, in individuals who go to a strict plant-based program, they can reduce their recurrence rate of flares of inflammatory bowel disease by 90%. Pretty powerful stuff. International Journal of Gastroenterology, you can look it up. So number 7, if I only eat plants, I won't have any energy. Now this is interesting, because I think that there is a transitional period to people. As you transition your fuels from diesel, toxic fuel, to kind of high-grade plant-based nutrition, your chemistry changes in your body. And for many people, there's a feeling that they haven't got enough, right? That their energy is a little bit off. Something's different. It takes time for the body to adapt. But be patient with it. 21 days to 3 months at the very most, and most describe a radical increase in their energy, less fatigue, more rapid recovery, etc. But the reality becomes, that's why we're seeing more and more new vegetarian or vegan athletes coming out. Whether it be back today with Carl Lewis and the like, or whether it be some of these football stars or MMA fighters, etc. Whereas we'll hear about from a great boxer this afternoon, that plant-based nutrition fuels the body good, if you will. The next is this. Read it. This matters. People who are going to make change should go home and on a piece of paper write a line down the middle. My reasons to change, my reasons not to change. If your reasons not to change are more powerful than your reasons to change, it ain't time. Okay? And continue to look for reasons to change. But this truly depends. If you choose, for example, like some people hate physical activity, right? They're like, I hate putting on pink spandex and sweating with a bunch of people, I hate it, right? Well, that's not necessarily physical activity. There are many other ways you get physical activity that you can enjoy and have fun with. Same idea with nutrition. It is about altering and changing your mind. You see, I grew up where I wasn't allowed any meat or dairy or refined foods or anything, right? We were under strict house orders in my house. It's my grandfather's ranch, right? So we couldn't even go in the community to eat anything because we looked bad, right? And so then what did that do? It made me want it, right? So when I'd go to like a church gathering or something, I'd sneak in the corner, quickly eat a few slices of pizza. Right? And then I'd feel horrible. I'd feel sick and disgusting. I'd be like, oh, why did I do that? And I did that as I went through all the way until medical school. Every once in a while I'd do it and I'd feel horrible and never do it anymore. But I went to med school and I realized, wait a second. Stop. What really matters to you? Health or non-health? So the people who say, well, do the 80-20 diet or the 90-10 diet, why would you even put 10% of crud and junk in your body if you really care about your body? Why wouldn't you put only health, vital, promoting foods in your body? And radically, I began to change my mind. So now, when I'm in my office, let's say, and there are a bunch of other people, because it's a big office, lots of other docs, etc., and some rep brings in, pizza or other food, I just look at it and go, oh, no, I'm good, thanks. Have my salad. I sit there in the corner. Everybody's like, oh, I feel so guilty being in front of you. And I'm like, well, you're fine. We'll talk. But what I love, now the drug reps are starting to bring in salads and all kinds of other little stuff like that's my option. I'm like, I'm still not going to eat your food, just so you know. It's kind of, for me, it's an ethical thing. But nevertheless, right, it's half full or half empty. The reality becomes is perspective is everything when it comes to your health. The reality becomes that you open up your mind and your palate to flavors and textures you've never would have had. So the next one is this. Insert your word. Or, think about the person you're going to have a conversation with. Insert their word. This is important. I don't believe it. That guy's crazy. Want to go get science, get more books, get more information. See if you can look at the information yourself and come to a conclusion. I'm too old. Never. You're too young. Never. I'm too set in my ways. Never. I'm too habituated to food. I'll never be able to give it up. Never. I've tried before and I just can't do it. Never. You are able to. You can make choices that promote your health. Today is a new day, right? Because I know some of those are in some of your minds, aren't they? That you're thinking about some of those things. I'm too lazy. I'm too bored. You name it. That is not true. You never are. If you accept this message of vitality and health, today may be the day to make choices. If you have goals of weight loss, many people say I have to restrict how much I eat. That is a fallacy when it comes to plant-based nutrition because of the concept of caloric density. So if you look, these are both 1,500 calorie programs. But look how much more volume is on the right side of your screen. A huge amount of food. The reality comes, if you have goals of weight loss, you merely eat here. That's my problem. That's all I eat, so it's impossible to gain weight, right? If you want to gain weight, you just have to eat more of it. To me, that's no longer a priority. When I played competitive tennis, it was, right? Because I'd be on the court up to 8 hours a day, 2 hours in the gym, etc. So I had about 30 pounds more muscle on me. But that's not really valuable to me right now when I'm trying to help people work in the clinic, doing research, etc. So think about where your goals are and eat accordingly. Because food is information, not just calories, of course, but it also can be your greatest friend, or if you will, your worst enemy. The truth is, eating more plants means more food, more nutrients, and more flavors. And that can be a challenge for some people, right? They're like, well, I only like this, man, I got to rat out one of my stash. She comes in and she'll sit down and have a strawberry Pop-Tart. That's her breakfast. I'm like, what are you doing? What is that? But she has such a hard time opening her palate up to the colors and the flavors and the variety that exists. But today, open your mind up, not so large that your brain falls out, but open your mind up to new flavors, to new things, to trial them. Do you know that one of the greatest preventives of Alzheimer's, if you will, is going to be trialing new and different things throughout the life, as long as the life you have? If you get stuck in one place and just do this repetitively, all this fades away. So make sure you are arborizing your brain, growing the neurons out. Number 12, going plant-based means I cannot eat out. That is not reality. In 2015, you can do it anywhere just about. Yes, if you're in the middle of Nebraska, deep in their cornfields, that's a little challenging, but then you just have some corn. You'll survive, it's okay, right? I mean, this goes back to this other question, though, some people who say, for example, well, what about when I'm in Italy? What about when you're in Italy? Or what about Thanksgiving? What about Thanksgiving? It's one day a year. What's your point? If you want to go eat a bunch of non-health promoting foods on Thanksgiving, knock yourself out. It's not good for you, but knock yourself out. And then Thanksgiving's over. And go back and eat health promoting foods again. Right? It's not this, oh my gosh, I'll never be able to enjoy Thanksgiving again in my life. Or we come up like our family does with radical, exciting menus, right, that are pure plant-based, and we love them. Totally up to you. If it's vegetarian or vegan, it must be healthy. Oh, yeah. Kind of like this slide, right? So it's all plant-based or it's all vegetarian, right? Yeah, if you look here, is that really health-promoting foods versus this, right? The right, the left? No. So make sure, do not lie to yourself. Don't kid yourself. I have patients who come in. I had a lady the other day. She's about 305 pounds. She's got bad knee arthritis. She's got a lot of other issues. I said, oh, I'd love to share with you some exciting information on how you can reverse your diabetes and lose some weight. I'm already a strict vegan. You know, there's not a lot else I can do for my health. I'm like, oh my gosh, she must be a vegan, right? So do not lie to yourselves. And the reason why I also say that is this reality is what happens. Is that if you claim to believe a system of thought and rationale that we know is largely health promoting, and you proclaim that to the world around you, you are doing a disservice to the movement. You are doing a disservice to the science that exists. Sorry, hate to rat you out like that, but it's true. So do not do that. Your culture, our society deserves better to know the truth about how vital and healthy you can be. This is what we're talking about, right? This is my meals one day, right? Just a whole bunch of variety and color. The conclusion is the science is clear. The health benefits are powerful. Key factors need to be addressed for specific populations at specific times in their life. But when you think about the big statement here, health comes from healthy living. Healthy living looks like this. More plants, regular exercise, emotional poise, restful sleep. This is where health comes from. We are imperfect people in an imperfect world. I have a car accident today on my way back from Jacksonville, and my arm is split through the skin. I'm bleeding out. Do not offer me a green juice. Take me to the ER and suture me up and fix my bones, right? In the same way, if I'm obese and develop hypertension and diabetes, do not give me drugs. Fix the underlying issue. Or as Dean Ornish, I loved how he used to say this, he said something to the effect that our healthcare system is essentially as though we have a mountain pass without guardrails, and we're building hospitals all along the bottom. Because people are just falling off. Set up your life in such a way that there are guardrails that guide and direct your life to one of thriving and vitality. And if something bad happens to you, you can look in the rearview mirror and say, I did the best I could based on the science that exists, and let's face this now. Not, oh, I should have, would have, could have, what if only, oh, etc. But there are challenges. And when patients see me, they say something to this effect. So you want me to change? Don't you just love me like I am? And they say, do you want me to change? If you run the statistics, if you want to be healthy in America today, you have to be radically different. 70% of Americans are overweight or obese. 1 out of 3 has high blood pressure. 1 out of 6 has high cholesterol. 1 out of 9 has diabetes, right? Remember those stats from the beginning? So if you look at the person across from you or in the Publix or the shopping center or wherever else, what they're doing may not be the best for you. And in fact, if you choose to live the way they are, you should expect your disease process to be similar. But if you choose to do what the science says and what our rational knowledge reinforces, you should expect to thrive. The benefits of this are personal to you. They are social and cultural, as you've heard about from different speakers and from the different booths outside. And they are both environmental and global. The call for each one of us to be as vital as we can be has powerful ramifications. I appreciate you letting me come into your circle of influence for a few moments today. And I want to challenge you as you leave this day to day to think on what is your circle of influence, whether it be as a school teacher, as a businessman, whether it be your family setting, whether it be writing your congressman or the rest. But think about who and how you can influence the hearts, the minds, and the lives of other people for good. But first, do not neglect yourself so that you can be an example to others. Thanks for the chance to spend some time with you.